Morning, Your Worship, councillors, committee members.
Recording in progress.
Thank you and welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting today, the 10th of March 2022. No mai haramai. Our meeting is being live streamed, so to those who are watching from afar, nice to have you with us at our meeting this morning as well. We all know the drill with the mobile phones, thank you very much. And we will take a break, probably around 11 o'clock. And then hoping to finish between 12 and 1, hopefully. So thank you. Mrs. Trumper, I understand you're saying our prayer this morning. Thank you.
Kia hihiri te tātou. Tū taua mai I runga, tū taua mai I raro, tū taua mai I roto, tū taua mai I waho. Kia to ai, te Māori tū, te Māori ora, ki te katoa, homi e, hui e, tā ki e.
Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Now, apologies. I've got one apology so far from Mr. Basini Tule. And I think that's the only apology. Yes, the only apology. Thank you. It's been moved, and I'll second that the apology from Mr. Basini Tule be accepted. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. Now, we do have a number of our councillors and committee members watching from afar. They are on Zoom. Can we just for the record, can we just thank you, Una.
So welcome to our elected members who are joining us via Zoom today. We've got Councillor Kai Fong, Councillor Yates, and just zooming in right now is Councillor Tapsell.
So thank you. That's Councillor Yates, Tapsell and Kai Fong. Kai Fong. Thank you. Everybody keeping safe. Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest, please, this morning? No, thank you. Urgent items not on the agenda? Carl? Oh, sorry, Your Worship.
Yes, Madam Chair, just the announcement of MIQ last night and followed up this morning. I had a call from the Chief of Staff who leads MIQ, and the only MIQ that is going, it's public knowledge, the only MIQ that is going to remain open here is the Sudima. And I suggested, because of the relationship that we had when we first began our journey 2 years ago on MIQ and welcoming our people home safely, and a meeting here held at Council, it would be really nice if, when the time is right, we also thanked all of the services involved. It's been our DHB, our police and the Army, and I think it would be very fitting that we welcome them with Te Arawa, because we have really led the way on our COVID response here in Te Arawa territory.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Your Worship. That would be a lovely thing to do, and it would be very much in keeping with the Te Arawa and Rotorua way. Thank you.
Thank you.
To be honest, I won't miss the MIQs. I mean, I know they served a purpose, but thank you. Confirmation of minutes, the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting minutes on 10th of February 2022. Could I ask a mover? Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Wang. That the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 10th of February 2022 be confirmed as a true and correct record. It has been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you. Carried. Now we're into our staff presentations. Oh, sorry, a question? Yes. Councillor Kai Fong. Sorry, I must take it a bit slowly. Yes, please.
Sorry, I was saying aye.
Oh, thank you, saying aye. Thank you very much, thank you. And I realise with 3 councillors zooming in, I'll have to slow it down a wee bit so we can make sure that if your hand is raised, we don't just overlook you. Yes, Your Worship.
Point, because we are going into this Zoom environment in this uncertain time, it would be lovely if all of us on Zoom, whether they're national calls or local, if we could have the new destination brand behind us, put onto our iPads as elected members when the time is right. When the time is right.
Yes, thank you. I think that would be good because I have to say that Councillor Donaldson, I'm not sure which is more striking, looking at Councillor Donaldson or the backdrop. Because it is very striking, actually. It's lovely colour. And so, yes, no, point taken. Thank you, Your Worship.
Right, Andrew. I was jealous of Dave at our Zoom yesterday.
No, it does look really nice. It didn't detract from Councillor Donaldson, of course. And now our presentations. This is item number 6 on the agenda, page 11, the long-term plan, year 2 delivery 2022 to 2023. So I think Thomas and Una are going to speak to the presentation. Una, do I have to do anything here? Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Morena Korua.
Morena, councillors and board members. I'm going to start the presentation and just take through the numbers, the strategy side, and then Una will kick off with regards to the engagement with our community. And I'll stop at a couple of places to answer any questions rather than going through the whole thing at once, and just acknowledging as well that there were a couple of councillors that weren't at the workshops, so obviously happy to go into a little bit more detail if required by the chair on some of those questions. So just a bit of a reminder on where we are. So we are now partway through year 1 of our long-term plan, which was adopted 8 months ago in June 2021, and we are talking about year 2 of our LTP, which commences for the period 1 July 2022 to the 30th of June 2023. And obviously after that we will have another year, being year 3, and at which point Council will once again redo its next long-term plan. The reason why I bring that up is that the LTP was adopted 8 months ago, and it was adopted on the basis of Vision 2030 and Action to Vision, and it focused really on a couple of key strategies that were embedded into the long-term plan. And those being the 5 that you see in front of you on there. And just a reminder, therefore, of what they are. Housing and thriving communities is predominantly tied to supporting the growth of our district in housing, particularly around east and west. It focuses on plan changes and to allow for intensification. It focuses on working with central government with regards to IAF or infrastructure acceleration funding to help free up more land and provide more housing for our community. The community safety focuses on community hubs and locations of interest. It focuses on working with our central partner agencies to provide better outcomes for our community. It's around CCTV extension of our network. It's around community patrols, and ultimately around the cohesiveness and ensuring that our community is safe. Economic development focuses on the back of COVID-19 around the Economic Recovery Fund, but also around freeing up land for industrial and commercial developments, and in particular industrial, to help allow Rotorua grow and create more job opportunities for our community. Climate change, the predominant one there is FOGO, which is the food and organic waste recovery from our waste cycles, and a continuation of obviously the recycling and the waste minimisation strategy. On top of that, obviously our infrastructure supports a lot of our goals around climate change, and in particular around stormwater. And then our key network infrastructure improvements, allowing for growth, big focus on stormwater out east and out west. So obviously out east supporting the tribal land developments, and out west to provide for intensification and greenfield developments in Pukehangi, as well as the intensification of and the allowing the changes of the CBD with regards to change of use, and allow provide for more housing opportunities. And that is predominantly tied to the stormwater challenges that we have. On top of that, wastewater treatment plant upgrade, the completion of the Rotorua sewerage scheme, lakefronts development, the Waka Forest development, continuation of the Performing Arts Centre refurbishment, and the museum. So obviously there's a significant program of work, but also there's some really key strategies that were agreed upon 8 months ago and still have a place in this world today. And so in saying that, there are some risks that we face, and so when looking at year 2 of our LTP and a recognition that the strategies that were agreed upon are still the strategies that are relevant today, there are outside forces that we do need to consider when preparing our program of work going forward. And some of these we don't know what the impacts of them will be, and we'll have to continue to monitor what they are, but they will have an impact on us going forward. So there's local government reform, there's RMA reform, there's Three Waters reform, and we're also aware that central government is looking at civil defence reform. So all of those will impact us in one way or another, each differently. And at this point, while there's indications of what it may look like, we are noticing that it's not set in stone yet as to what those look like or what the impacts are. So therefore it's hard to anticipate and budget for what the implications of those would be. COVID-19, I think for us as a community, for the first time in 2 years, we're really facing the impacts of that on our people, just like the rest of New Zealand. And it's the unknown of what the next few months looks like, and in particular what the next year looks like. But we are seeing challenges with regards to suppliers, materials, logistics challenges, staffing as well, not just for ourselves, but for businesses out in the community. And so unknown as to what the impact of that will be going forward, but it will likely have an impact on us. And then on top of that, inflationary pressures, mainly as a result of probably the previous two that I talked about. Inflation is currently tracking at 5.9%, but most economists, I think, are now forecasting it to be 7 to 8% for the year. So that obviously puts immense pressure. Remembering that's headline inflation, so within that, the inflation that we face on our services is a little bit different. But in saying that, the main driver of that headline inflation are things that we face. So in particular, raw materials, steel, concrete, fuel, those sorts of things, labour pressures as well. So we will face a higher rate of inflation on our cost base. In particular, what we've done is we've looked to try and minimise the impacts of inflation where we can on our cost base. And
Excuse me, Thomas, can you just keep your voice up, please? Thank you
very much. Sorry, I'll bring it a bit closer. My apologies. We've also taken a focus on user pays, making sure that we've forecast what they are. It's a little bit unknown about what those impacts of those previous things will have on them, so we've based them on assumptions of returning to some level of normality around our fees and charges, and we have looked at our staffing, and in particular our staff retention and wage pressures, and we have focused on that because as we are experiencing challenges retaining and attracting staff, just like the rest of businesses in New Zealand. And so what that looks like from a year 2 delivery perspective, from a rating perspective, is uplifting year 2 of the LTP and providing for a 5.7% rate increase. And again, the increase is driven off the back of the key strategic priorities, focusing on housing and planning, water sustainability, funding to support our asset renewals has been a big component of this, ensuring we can look after the things that we've got. Providing for contractual inflation for those contracts that provide for those, but all other inflation being absorbed into our budgets, providing for staff retention, so we have allowed for a slightly higher percentage increase in wage costs to ensure that we can retain our staff and attract staff, and then finance costs as well with regards to our increase in our borrowings as a result of investment into our capital works program. From a capital program perspective, it is a program of $142 million. Underneath that is a $44 million asset renewal program. So once again, it's a non-negotiable with regards to providing funding for our renewal program. Do you need me to stop, or is that okay? Wastewater treatment plant upgrade. Work is commencing now on the consent and the upgrade works that are required. We are targeting the start of the Tarawera sewage scheme, the completion of the lakefront, the museum, and also the aquatic centre. In and around that, obviously, there's a significant amount of work to complete the Rotorua sewage scheme and all the other works that are currently underway. Changes to the plan. We have obviously reforecast where our capital works program is, and so if I go to this next slide, what you'll see is we have talked previously in the past around a significant investment into our infrastructure and our community assets at the start of the LTP. The blue line along the top is the original LTP profile of our capital works program, and you'll see therefore in 2022, which is this current year, that we are forecasting an underspend, and what we're seeing is that reforecasting is a reshaping of the 2023 year. So we're seeing a couple of things move around for timing, but the majority of the work program and that change is shifting into the 2024 year. However, it is still a significant investment into our infrastructure. And to provide you some detail of where that is, so those are the main projects that make it up. The big ones obviously being looking at the museum and the commencing of the work on that, and my understanding is that very shortly Council will be providing an update on where the detailed design and the next steps will be. The wastewater treatment plant, resource consent and upgrade. We're about to go to market with regards to the aquatic centre refurbishment, and as you can see, significant investment elsewhere into our key infrastructure, in particular stormwater, sewage, water and roading. And so just on that, I'm happy to stop there and take any questions that you may have on either the operating, the rating side and the capital works side.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Thank you for your report so far, Thomas. With regard to the COVID law case that the police and the Defence Forces won, and the advice now coming from the public service that no more staff should be dismissed through having not taken a vaccine, how do you think Rotorua stands legally for the people that it let go recently for that reason?
Sorry, Councillor, I don't understand the relevance of your question to this discussion.
Yes, and it's not relevant to the presentation at this point. Thank you. There'll be an opportunity perhaps to ask that question a bit later, but it's certainly not relevant to what we've just heard. Thank you. Any further questions, please? Councillor Kai Fong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, Thomas, around inflation for wage pressure. Are we also including our CCOs in that? Because obviously we may need to fund them with the increase in their costs as well, including wage pressure?
No, we do budget separately from them, and funding that or increases that they planned are part of the discussions around the level of funding that each of the CCOs have with us with their overall funding. But no, what they propose to do is not tied to what we do.
Thank you.
Just in terms of, even if it's not just with the wages, but just in contracts and that we may be awarding to them, that there needs to be an adjustment, because obviously they'll face increases with their costs of fuel, their wages, supply costs and things like that as well.
They actually determine that themselves, Councillor Kai Fong. They are a CCO.
But it is correct with regards to an inflationary uplift in the contracts between us where that is appropriate. Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Thomas.
The third leg of this, I guess, is with regards to how we do fund our operations, is the debt. And so again, the blue line is a reflection, which is the squiggle, is a reflection of what our LTP profile was. And that profile, again, was really tied to the capital works profile that's set into the LTP. So again, debt is being used to support key infrastructure around growth and level of service improvements to our community for both infrastructure and community assets. And with a reforecasting down of our capital works program for this year, being 2022, what we're seeing in a transitioning and a reforecasting of that program of work into 2023 and 24, we're seeing that increase in debt to support that capital works shift. And so what we are seeing is an increase in the forecast debt from about 65 million to 84 million, and that's a reflection of the changing and the timing of our capital works program. So it's not new debt, it is just debt that is already in a profile that's been approved in our LTP, and it is just a reforecasting of that and a retiming of it. It's reflective of our capital works program. And so you asked the question, how is our debt being applied? Well, these are the projects that are drawing down on our debt. And so you'd say, are these necessary? And I would argue that these are all key, either critical infrastructure or community assets that are going either through an upgrade or a refurbishment and play an incredibly important part to our community. The main driver is the wastewater treatment plant, the consent and the upgrade. Obviously that's a substantial piece of work that will be undertaken over the coming periods. The aquatic centre refurbishment, the museum, the Tarawera sewage scheme, improving our water supplies, in particular around security and providing for growth. Stormwater has a significant investment while we are working with central government on obtaining more funding to support that program of work. There is still a significant investment from our community into that space, and that's really critical for the future growth and housing of our community. Finishing the lakefront, the economic recovery projects, which are obviously debt funded, and the completion of the Performing Arts Centre. So what does our debt profile look like and what does our headroom look like? So just again, a reminder that the top line is our debt limit, the dark blue one. The grey line is our old profile of how we were taking on debt as per the LTP, and the dark shaded area is now where we propose to be. And what you see is a steepening of the curve and a shift of the curve across, and that just reflects the timing of those capital works projects that are drawing down debt and how it's now likely to fall. So it is a steep profile, but it was steep before, and it's just a reminder that we do have headroom still, so we're not at our limit, even though we are forecast to get close to it. So we do have a buffer to provide for the unknown going forward. And again, that debt is being used to support our key infrastructure. So with that, happy to take any questions on the debt.
Yes, Your Worship.
Thomas, it's sort of timely, and I know we'll have a discussion at some point about the Three Waters Working Party report, but out in the community, we're hearing, and we've got the Working Party trying to look at affordability of Tarawera scheme, Rotorua. And there is this perception, just load up your debt because it'll be sorted out with the new entities. Can you give us a view publicly about why that's not deemed to be wise and business as usual?
Yeah. So we have a financial strategy and we have a program of work, and so we are under instructions from the DIA that we, to stay within the parameters of the financial prudence of our LTP. So for us to load up our balance sheet and load up our debts on the hope that a Three Waters entity would take over is just not a prudent decision. And the reason it's not prudent is that A, we've been told we shouldn't do that, and B, we don't actually know that if these reforms go ahead, or when, of how the balance sheet will be divided up and how debt would be divided up. And I think the worst thing you could ever do is make an assumption that it would all go across to a new entity, and then you live with the consequences that that's not how it will be carved up, and then you live with the consequences of that. So for us, we are working through what we know now, and we have a long-term plan, we have strategies, we have investment, and we are adhering to that.
Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. And Thomas, staying with the theme of sticking with our financial strategy and the Fitch AA- rating that we currently have, in that scenario, if we were to load up our debt, what might that do to our credit rating? And just if you could comment on the benefits of retaining that credit rating. Thank you.
So the credit rating is important, that it provides a price premium on our debt. And so you can have a reduction in the credit rating, which obviously reflects a weakening of a number of things, one being our financial position, but also our community and the global position. It's very hard to say what one action would have on a credit rating, because it is an incredibly complex calculation, and they take not only our balance sheet and how we perform into account, but also wider social, micro and macroeconomic factors and social factors. We've just started the renewal of that as we speak. All I can say is that to help ensure we're successful in retaining our credit rating, the best thing that we can do is obviously stick to the financial strategy that is set in our LTP, because those credit ratings do like certainty, do like the fact that you're planning well and you're adhering to those plans, and would probably have a negative impact if you were to skew away from that.
Thank you. Councillor Kai Fong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thomas, just a question on the debt, where you've said that we still don't know in terms of the global fallout. There's still more hurt in the economy to come, and we don't know what our debt servicing costs. Well, we know that they're going to go up. So that is it still prudent to continue on with a program of capital works and borrowing, or whether we should be looking at being a bit more cautious?
We have seen an increase in our in debt going forward, but I'll just remind councillors that we do have a Treasury Policy which provides the framework of how we refinance and take on debt. And so our debt is spread over a 10-year period. And is predominantly fixed, so we're not exposed to as much to floating interest rates, and it will take a significant amount of time for that debt to reprice. A reminder, though, that we do not pay the same interest rates that residential or businesses pay. Ours are tied to pretty much US Treasury rates and bond rates, and so while we have seen an uplift in that, they are still considered low, even though they're not considered low compared to the historical lows of 6 months ago, which is probably the cheapest it has ever been. And so while we now can no longer get 10-year funding at, say, 2.6%, and just a reminder that our average cost of borrowings at the moment across our whole portfolio is, I think, 2.78%, we still can get 10-year money at 3.6%. And so in the LTP, we had anticipated an increase in the cost of borrowings. It has happened a little bit quicker than that. However, as we have not taken on as much debt as we'd forecast, we are able to, at this stage, absorb those increases into the existing budgets, and so there's no negative effect. Just the markets are a little uncertain around those interest rates increases as well, and how you can see that is what it's called a very flat curve, and the flat curve represents the fact that for us, 3-year money, borrowing for 3 years is something like 3.1%, and 10-year money is 3.6%. So there's very little difference in it, and that's a reflection of the market being unsure as to the whether these higher interest rates will be there into the longer term. So they do anticipate that they will likely come back into the future. And so, yes, we're seeing a sudden increase. We are able to accommodate with that within our existing budgets. And if they do continue to increase further, it may create a challenge, but not at this point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I think that's quite a reassuring response for the community to hear that, particularly when they're facing their own significant financial pressures.
Thank you, Councillor Kai Fong. Thank you, Thomas. Okay, thank you. Hill.
So, which leaves the final piece with regards to providing detail of information on how the rates falls. So the rate increase itself is actually this time split very evenly between general rates and targeted rates, but within the targeted rates, the majority of the increase is actually tied to the water rate, which also has a flow-on effect to the water by metre rate. And so it's not a proportionate or an average 5.7% across the board. However, between the split of general and targeted rates, it is very similar. So one of the challenges that we also have is obviously trying to maintain the progressive nature of the rating, which was a direction from Council at the time of the LTP, not only this LTP, but for some time ago. And by progressive, I mean making sure that not using fixed charges as much as possible and using capital value, and so therefore capital value should reflect people's ability to pay, and so therefore those with more ability to pay should pay more, and that's predominantly only applies to the general rate. I know not always everyone agrees with that principle, but that is the principle that we apply. And so how does it fall? So what we have done is we've retained once again the uniform annual general charge. That is the component of the general rate that all ratepayers pick up. And when we apply the rates, what we have seen is actually a really tight spread of the rates. So we haven't seen the anomalies that we've seen in the past when we've had revaluation changes. And so in particular, if you look at residential, those between lower value and higher value are quite a tight range. And where there's that difference, that's a reflection of the general rate that is picked up on the capital value. And you can see again across the others, there is a tight banding of those. I'll just make the comment that the capital values that are shown are the capital values that were done in the October 2022 revaluation. They are now likely out of date with regards to where the market is, but this is the basis that we rate on, and we can't amend that. So happy to answer any questions on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thomas, just interested in the metered water rates. You mentioned they were a percentage of the targeted rate increase. Could you just refresh my memory who is still metered? Because I know that we, as a council, decided not to continue with putting in metering on new residential. So could you just run through who is actually still metered?
Yep, so the area of that's predominantly considered Rotorua urban, which is obviously the majority of the city, pays by a targeted rate. Where the water supplies were extended outside of that, in particular into rural communities, such as Rotorua, etc., they are charged by a metre. And that is because those communities have a mix of commercial and residential as well in some cases, such as a dairy farm could have access to the potable water, partly used for the house, partly used for the cowshed, etc. And each of our smaller urban area, smaller supplies have differing charges per metre based on an understanding of how that community that connects to it uses it.
Thanks. And I have raised this before, but I do think it's inequitable that residential properties around the lakes and rural areas where there isn't a commercial use are still metered when we have changed our policy not to meter for water. And I do think that those should be moving to a fixed targeted rate, just as urban residential. Thanks, Thomas.
Thank you. Any further questions for Thomas? Thomas, is that your final?
So with that, just a reminder and a snapshot of an overview that the long-term plan was adopted 8 months ago. It really did focus on some key strategic challenges for our community. The LTP was obviously done in the midst of COVID as well, and we're still in that environment. There are a number of risks to the delivery of this plan that are unknown with regards to regulatory reform and the unknown of the impact that COVID supplies and logistics has. But overall, it's a 5.7% rate increase as per year 2 of our LTP. Debt of $84 million, and that is to support a $143 million investment into infrastructure in our community, and in particular the majority of that infrastructure being to support the growth of our district. And that it sees a continuation of the investment into key community assets and the completion of those. So that is the end of my portion of the presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Hi.
Sorry?
Hello, Madam Chair. Dr. Morgan. Just on the point that that Tomas has made, could we request a report, please, from you, Tomas, around the inconsistency in terms of a set rate and a metered rate for the water supplies? Sorry, I'm still getting over COVID. The reason for that is I think when the community perceives that there are inconsistent ways of rating, it can be quite an issue. And so if we've got a report that sets out which parts of the community are being metered and which parts of the community are being given a fixed rate, we'll have a clear understanding of your explanation earlier. Because I know for a fact that Rotorua on the Whakatane Highway, on State Highway 30, there is actually no farming out there, there's no commercial activity, there's no industrial, but that community is being metered. So your statement that we need to do that because there's commercial or industrial activity doesn't hold in that regard. And I'd be concerned if we were giving the wrong message to our constituency that was the reason when it doesn't actually appear to hold in that situation. So if we had a map and we were able to see what communities are metered and what communities are actually on the fixed charge, that will clarify that, not only for ourselves, but also for our constituency.
So just on that, Dr. Morgan, the good thing is that if you look at our long-term plan and in our funding impact statements, and in particular, there's a section on fees and charges and rating, we do exactly that. We provide maps of which portion pays what and the reason why. So happy to.
We can direct Mr. Morgan to that. Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, then your worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Thomas, you talked earlier about an uplift in fees and charges. Can you give us any idea on the quantum, or is it going to be across the board, or is it going to be individual fees and charges looked at?
No, we haven't per se lifted fees and charges, other than we've adopted those that were set out in year 2 of the LTP. The reason I mentioned it is there's a risk to obviously being able to achieve some of those because of economic activity tied to the current challenges that we face. And the one that was increased to match the rating increase was the water by metre. So all the water by metre rates for our community have gone up, are being proposed to go up, by the same amount that we're proposing to increase the targeted rate for water.
Yeah, just really a response to that. The figure that we all go to is the 5.7% increase, but I do remind elected members that that was our guidance to Thomas when we held our line about our priorities for year 2 of the long-term plan: housing, infrastructure, stormwater and community safety. So we said these are critical and in a really tough time, and we've been reminded of that this morning. It's not a business as usual environment. I think it is very wise to actually hold to our aspirations as elected members about investing in the right things for our community. If we can't tamper with little bits of it really and pull it back, because if you do over that capital investment in infrastructure and sewage and all of those things we've been talking about for years, we will undo the aspiration of where we want to take our community. Our community understands where we're heading, but it is a tough time, and so there will be a community response to this about affordability and ability to pay, but it is a nonsense to say that we can tamper and pull back on anything here. And I really warn us all as we go into a really challenging time. And there'll be a lot of debate about this, and local body elections in 2013 this year. It is absolutely the wrong thing to do to say you should stop investing in our aspirations. That is quite the wrong message. We have had caution presented to us about where could we pull back, where could we hold the line. Fees and services are going to be a challenge. You can see already that it's hard to keep up our current levels of service delivery. It is hard. We're in a COVID environment. And all of us, everybody here, the number of staff in our, amongst our contracted staff, the number of staff here in council, really affected by COVID at the moment. I think you're doing a remarkable job. You're doing a remarkable job to give the impression that it's business as usual. It isn't business as usual, but I really urge that you don't tamper with that level of investment for our long-term future, so that we are ready to do business when the borders open, and bring it on. But we must have that infrastructure, we must have that investment in those things that we've said and always fought for. So I don't like it. None of us like it as elected members, but it's platitudinous to say a nil rates increase. So I do support our collective decision of an indication of what we want to take out to our community. Our community will respond. You know that they will, and that's what happens when this year 2 goes out. But we must have a robust and resilient community ready to face the sort of issues on climate change that we've already seen with our flooding and our stormwater networks. We were warned that the figures were going to be eye-watering, and we must do it. So I totally support the total package, and wouldn't like to see any part of it pulled back.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do agree. You know, we're not going to come to a grinding stop. You know, nothing goes on hold. It's absolutely crucial that always we keep in mind affordability, but actually we do have to keep making sure that we don't take our eye off the ball, off the future, and continue with the work at hand. But we are all aware that cost of living increases are impacting our community, but nevertheless, our job is to keep an eye on the future. And so thank you for your comments, Your Worship. Thomas, have you concluded? And Una, will you... Oh, thank you. Councillor Kumar, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, through the Chair, Thomas, thank you very much for your presentation. I have a different opinion. I think, yeah, there's some things that we need to progress on non-stop, but I think on some other things we need to adjust our tailoring to see what type of cloth we've got at that stage. And we are in a different environment. So my question is around key regional cultural assets back online. I believe that even though, because there has been COVID and there has been, Shimpak has been used as an example, and is that reflective of Shimpak and the museum, that we are now back online with the funding that's available, or did we have all that funding to go start off with?
So it mainly refers to the Performing Arts Centre, which is scheduled to reopen in October, but also it is about commencing work on the museum, and there is work currently underway just finalising the detailed design, at which point it will come through to you shortly, and it is anticipated that work will commence on that project in that fiscal year.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Councillor Tepsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is actually just around the significant investments that we've made into the community and how that's reflected in our long-term plan. If you think about the capital expenditure that we have spent, it was only a few years ago that that figure was only around $25 million. The figure now is $140 million of capital expenditure, which are projects, which are assets that council has either built or maintained that will be there for future generations, not just within this 10-year plan. So Thomas, my question is, how are these projects reflected in terms of our debt? Because we can get very scared at that significant figure that we can see, but what it doesn't reflect is that all of our projects are partnership funded through the government or other philanthropic entities. And a perfect example is our $50 million museum, of which I think council, we only put in about $15 million, $15 million for a $50 million project. So when we look at that number on our debt, does that reflect the additional funding that we've received for our projects, or only what council is spending?
Only council.
Thank you. Good question. Is actually something that we have talked about in the past, but forget to re-raise. Within our LTP, it's safe to say that for us, our $100 million investment into some key infrastructure assets like the Waka Forest, the lakefront, the Performing Arts Centre and the museum is actually reflected in a total spend of about $250 million, I think, from last count, or thereabouts. And so what we are seeing is therefore that our investment is being amplified or multiplied well over twofold. And so we have done incredibly well to leverage other entities to help fund these. And no, that isn't reflected in our debt, because only our debt just reflects our investment. So yes, that increase in debt is actually better reflected in the multiplied value of the total investment into our community, which is well over twofold.
Thank you, Thomas. And sorry, Madam Chair, I did just have one final question. I think at that point is hugely significant when we look at how much we've been able to leverage the money that we do have and the rates that we do have. And while it is very hard at any time to go out to the community and say that there will be a rates increase, can you just give us some perspective on what a 5.7% rates increase looks like compared to the rest of the country? Because I'm hearing horrific figures, just as an example, next door in Tauranga, 13% rates increase. But what we don't see in those communities with the significant rates increase that are double figures is the amount of investment and assets, intergenerational assets that we've been able to secure here for Rotorua. So how do we compare to the rest of the country or the region? Because I think that's always a good way to put into perspective just where how we are faring compared to the rest of local government at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor. That was something that I shared in the workshop, and I was a little bit reluctant to share it in this open environment at this time, because I don't think it's my place to share what other councils are doing. So I'm happy to talk about numbers as a whole, but I won't mention those councils because they'll go through their process. Looking at what others were doing, we were on the low side. Some of our neighbours, as you've indicated, are 12 and 13%. Some other councils in New Zealand of the same size as us are sitting at 7s, 8s and 9s. And there are also some councillors that are sitting at 3.9s and 4s. But by far and large, the numbers that we were seeing were the majority were in the 7 to 8s north. And so therefore we would be in the lower quartile of rates increases across the country.
Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. Mr Morgan, did you have a question? No? Sorry, thank you. Oh, wait, I don't know. No, nobody else with a question? Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Thomas, for the presentation. Absolutely, I agree with some of the comments that have been made before. If we think that this is going to be tough now, and it is tough, you know, it is a tough environment right now, but if we think it's going to be tough now, if we don't make these investments, it's going to be much, you know, harder for the community and for council too in 10, 20 years' time if we don't make these essential investments into the community. You know, when I see on the previous slide, the mentions on the wastewater treatment plant, on aquatic centre, on all these projects, it's either housing or it's to improve our community and to provide these amenities, essential amenities for our community. But my question really was around the rates increase of 5.7. Thomas, if with the projections and the LTP, because we are largely falling in line with our projection for the rates increase when we first went out for consultation in 2021, because we're following along with this figure, what do you think is the likeliness of us actually staying in line with those projections for those the rates increases for the following years, just to install that confidence within the community that we are doing the necessary investments and that we will be able to more or less provide that confidence that we'll follow along with those figures?
Yep. There is as I said, a high degree of uncertainty going forward, which we don't know the outcome of that, and so it's very hard for me to say that we'll be able to adhere to those future increases going forward. What I'll do say is, of the things that are inside our control, we haven't done any deferment to achieve this number, which would provide for a surprise next year or the year after, and so. How the world evolves and that going forward is which will drive that. The one risk challenge that we do have going forward is inflation, and in particular demand on key resources around infrastructure investment. And what we are seeing is a significant increase in valuation of those assets, which at the time of the next long-term plan will be reflected in an increased level of spend to renew those, and renewals are tied to rate funding, and so the pressure point will come at the next LTP, as rates will likely have to be lifted to support the continuation of the renewal of our infrastructure. Because as you recall, about 7 years ago, this council did decide that funding of renewals was non-negotiable, and so we are seeing now pressure in that space, and I think that'll be the big challenge from a funding perspective, one of the challenges going forward.
Thank you. Mr Thomas, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just more of a comment, really. I just wanted to congratulate Thomas on, I think, a 5.7% increase when inflation is looking like it's going to be higher than that is a great outcome. And, I think over the last 3 long-term plans that we've done, even by the second year, we've been struggling to keep within the indicators of rates increases in the following years. So I think well done this time round that we've managed to keep within what was forecast when we put the LTP out last year.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Thomas. And I think you've got... So I'm going to draw this session to a close now. Is there any further from you, Thomas, or is it from Una?
The rest is from Una.
Thank you. Una. Oh, that's fine. Most of what we've seen up on the overheads today is really reflection of all the discussions that we had at our workshops and the, and all of the what would you call it, the backstory to everything. So that's why it's really is important that we attend those. Thank you, Una.
Thank you. So, kia ora, councillors. So just a couple of slides from me just to round off the conversation today. What we've got here is a real opportunity to have another conversation with our community about the understanding of where this council is heading. So it's an opportunity to really focus in on those key strategies and the direction that you set in the long-term plan by focusing on what will be delivered in year 2, so the year ahead of us. So, thinking about how we may do that, I think there's 2 main objectives to our piece of engagement in taking the long-term plan year 2 delivery out. And the first one is around showcasing that commitment to the key challenges identified in the long-term plan. And we've talked about those numerous times this morning. Those are the issues around housing, community safety, economic development, climate change and enabling infrastructure. We also have a second opportunity ahead of us at the moment in that there are a lot of conversations coming up in this calendar year leading up to the elections. And by going out with a year 2 delivery and what that looks like at the moment, there's also an opportunity at this time to actually set out and invite the community to participate in those conversations over the next 6 months. So a discussion document that we would likely put out would outline those conversations and provide indications of when those conversations and opportunities to participate will be. We do have a challenge again ahead of ourselves in terms of being able to engage at this time, and that is our ability or inability to be able to meet with our community face to face. In the past, we would have put a lot of effort into going to communities, running world cafes and the likes. And I know from feedback I get from yourselves is that you find those extremely valuable. But again, we find ourselves challenged in being able to do that, and so we have to look at other innovative ways in which we can engage. So we will again create a digital engagement strategy, and it will be based on a number of the assets as identified up there, providing opportunities through video, radio, newspaper advertorials and the likes to get those key messages across to our community and invite them to provide feedback and engage with us on our Let's Talk engagement platform. I mentioned earlier around opportunities to invite our community to have a conversation or conversations with us over the next 6 months. And this timeline sets out a number of those key conversations that we will be having. And going out at this stage with the discussion document allows us to highlight all of these various conversations that we've got listed up on the timeline. And as I said before, give that indication of when there'll be an opportunity for us to discuss those things with our community and get the feedback from them. So it's a pretty long list and won't include everything that this council is working with our community on, but it does highlight some of those really key conversations that are coming up. And lastly, we do plan to open up engagement around this following the council meeting. At the end of March, we will bring to you a draft engagement discussion document and then open that conversation up, or that wider conversation up, to our community from about the second week in April and closing in the second week of May. I'm happy to take any questions on sort of the engagement program as laid out there.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Una. Una, this engagement process, what is the budget for that?
The engagement is actually done all within house, and most of it is done using staff time. So it's the team themselves that undertake the engagement. There'll be a small amount used for advertising in terms of doing some Facebook posting and that, but it's a very small, if anything, budget.
Yes, Your Worship.
We've got a bit of a Rotorua story here, and LGNZ are going to want to do, a program about councils matter and people matter, and are we going to buy into that, or are we going to lead our own process here about year 2 of our annual plan? Because it's going to, a long-term plan, it's going to collide with the elections and central government, well, LGNZ, trying to lead a program to get people interested in local council elections. So how are we going to manage that as an overlay with year 2 of our LTP?
Through you, Chair, I don't believe that this is an overlay, so it's a very distinctive piece of work at this time that leads into the local election process. So what we're setting out here is, I guess, a series of stepping stones that should help to guide and lead our community towards voting. So yes, we will be going out. We have our conversation around our year 2, what that looks like. There are a number of conversations that as a council you will be having with your community, and all of those kind of stepping stone or lead a pathway towards the pre-election report, which will be published towards the end of June, early July. And that report sets out the key challenges that the district is facing, and becomes a really valuable piece of information for voters, but also for candidates who may be wishing to stand. In terms of awareness for the community on how they may wish to vote, there is work being undertaken by Local Government New Zealand and Solgum around a national campaign for voting. We are part of those conversations. The national campaign for voting will have some sort of key highlights for that, but as a community we need to be thinking locally about our local issues and driving our community to connecting voters with local issues with people who are standing for those issues.
Madam Chair, if I can just take the opportunity, because we were all invited as elected members to be on a forum a week ago with the Working Party on the future of local government, and I found it very, very interesting when we were told at that forum that we came to Rotorua first because you do things differently here, and I was very proud of that. I was very, very proud of that, and also asked, why did you look at a structure within council that is a different way of doing business than other councils? Our vision, our plan, and our localism approach. So I really do urge that we as elected members, and even though I'm not standing again, we own our story, and we go out and say year 2 of this is about where we are taking our community into the future. So I do see that there could be a bit of you get pulled into a campaign about the local body elections, but this is a very important opportunity for us to tell our story locally. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm drawing this discussion to a close because we've been on it for over an hour. So unless there's anything really that is different from what we've heard, I am going to now thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Dr. Morgan. Kia ora, Madam Chair, through you. Ona, in terms of the communication strategy, what proportion of those different communication mediums are in Te Reo Rangatira? I'm just interested in terms of our Reo Rua strategy and ensuring that that is carrying through across what we're doing. Could you let me know, please?
All our documentation that goes out from this council, as much as it possibly can, is done bilingually, and this won't. There will be no exception to that. The actual discussion document is in production at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, I'll give you the fight. You have something.
It was just a clarification, Madam Chair. I'm happy, but Una, thank you for your presentation on engagement. The two objectives are quite separate. So objective one is very much stick to the plan of year two, and that's open for feedback. We're not stepping away in any significant way, and that'll all be wrapped up in a shorter time frame than your objective two, which is invitations over the next 6 months. If you could just, I think there needs to be clarity around that, is that feedback for the year two of the long-term plan will wrap up by?
Correct. So feedback for the year two will be that process of the month of April. But what I've said here is that within that sort of April month where we're talking about delivery in year two, a lot of the conversations that are going to happen over the next 6 to 7 months will also then be seen as delivery in year two and beyond. So what we're aiming to do through that is really be clear with the community about conversations that are to come, and where the community has that opportunity to participate.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Una, for the presentation this morning. And thank you, committee members, for the good discussion that we've had this morning. That's it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Did I? Right. That's fine. Thank you very much. Right, so we go on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item number 7, the land swap at Otautu Bay, Lake Rotorua, that the report, land swap at Otautu Bay, Lake Rotorua, be received. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Carried. Morena Stavros.
Morena, Madam Chair. Kia ora katoa. The report is quite simple, actually. We do have a plan and an active program to install the main trunk system to connect the Rotorua and Namotu communities to the currently in progress wastewater reticulation in Rotoiti Rotoma. We have some funding from the Department of Internal Affairs as part of the Three Waters reforms, which allow us to connect that, those main trunks. One of the considerations for that is to identify a location for a future pump station to be installed in that area. We have found that the appropriate location sits on a private land, and the private land actually occupies part of a public road reserve. You have agreed with the owners of that land to have an exchange, a straight exchange, which says we'll trade off part of the road reserve for a piece of their land to install a future pump station, and basically we seek the council's agreement to enact that arrangement. It's a straight land exchange to future-proof our ability to serve the Rotorua and Namotu communities in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, Stavros, on page 13, the considerations for the site. And I've read through those. Would those considerations, and I don't see it there, also include proximity to any wahi tapu sites of significance?
Yes, Deputy Mayor Donaldson, in actually designing the main trunk system to the extent we are able to fund at this point in time, work with the cultural impact assessment team, and the location of the pipelines and the necessary facilities are really being done in conjunction with the cultural impact team.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Morgan?
Hi, kia ora through you, Madam Chair. So, just in terms of the land swap, there was a number of questions that came up. One is to do with consultation with iwi before divesting lands, given that this land was probably acquired under the Public Works Act. The second one is, in terms of the relocation of the pump station from where it was originally shown, there was, to my understanding, no need for a land swap. I'd also like to understand what the actual areas of land being exchanged are, because it looks like a threefold or fourfold difference in terms of what council is getting. Another question is that the pump station seems to be moving closer to the only house on that side of the road, in fact right next door to it. And I wonder if it's been taken into account that the pump station does generate noise, and that when the filters require maintenance or they fail, it creates a smell that that house is going to be exposed to. The original site is actually just visible on the plan, and it's right at the bottom of the page, which is probably close to 100 metres from that house. So I'm just wondering what the rationale was for the land swap when there was a perfectly acceptable solution in the original drawings.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think in terms of this report in front of you, I don't see this as a properly constructed question. My understanding is that Dr. Morgan has been intimately involved in the design of the main trunks, together with the cultural impact team. And if Dr. Morgan requires a more detailed response to that, I'm more than happy to do that. My colleague Gina Rangi responded to a similar inquiry some time ago about the consultation with this land. So I would not respond to these detailed inquiries here, but I'm more than happy to provide a parallel explanation in due course. As I said, I am surprised that these questions are asked here since Dr. Morgan has been involved in the design of the main trunks. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair.
No, just a moment. Just a moment, please, Mr. Morgan. I'll just give Gina Rangi an opportunity to respond. Thank you, Gina.
In terms of the overall process, we do have a process for land disposal, and so there is a policy that sets out the steps that are required to be taken, including confirming whether there are any Public Works Act obligations. I am aware, because I made inquiries prior to the meeting, that there has been in-depth discussion with local landowners and the adjoining owners in respect of this particular transaction, and they are represented by Kahui Legal, who are a very reputable law firm, and I'm sure they will have gone through all of the necessary steps to ensure that the owners are protected.
Thank you, Gina. I know that that is our process that we have in place. Mr. Morgan, was there something else you wanted to add there?
Sure. Just in terms of Stavros's answer, this relocation of the pump station has never been discussed within the iwi consultative group. So I'm not sure what Stavros is referring to.
There's a point of order. Thank you. Yeah, there's a point of order. Thank you, Your Worship.
We sought an assurance that the process was robust and that land swap policy process was undertaken. We got that assurance. I think it's very dangerous when individual councillors actually challenge the process because of their own interests, whatever they are.
Thank you.
We've got to make sure as politicians that the process is adhered to before we make a recommendation. I'm assured.
Thank you, and thank you. I'll just allow any further discussion on that from you, Mr. Morgan. Thank you. Are there any further? Yes, Mr. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Well, there's no requirement for him. We've got the second part to this too. Part two. You're moving part two. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Thomas, are you seconding part two?
I just had I had signalled I had a question,
yes.
but I am happy to second it as well.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Stavros, thanks for this report. Just two quick things. Just a reassurance, because I know that some of our Rotorua community will see this report, but they can be reassured that the installation of the pipeline is being funded by the DIA, that cost is not going to go on to the ratepayers at Rotorua. Is that correct?
We are not allowed to use grants recovery policies. We have a grant. If eventually we secure the funding required for the reticulation of Rotorua, that grant will not be forming part of the net costs that will be recovered by the ratepayers. Thank you.
Thank you. And just secondly, just looking at the map that shows the proposed site of the pump station and the proposed land swap, various lines drawn on it making it look like they're different sections, but I'm presuming it's the same landowners involved or owners whose property is adjacent to both areas, so that it's not, we're not swapping with a different landowner, I guess, is just seeking reassurance on that.
That's correct.
Thank you. And I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, did you have a further...
Just a small question.
Yes, certainly.
A very small one through you, Madam Chair. Stavros, I'm just looking at the map here, and the green bit is the bit that's being swapped for the site. And I'm aware that occasionally rural landowners will graze the road reserve and their fences creep into the road reserve. So while we meet the survey and legal costs, are there any fencing costs and where do they fall? Or is it already fenced off by the landowner? And
thank you, Deputy Mayor. No, the fence is already in place there. My understanding, and I might not be 100% right there, but that fence has been there for 60 or 70 years. Thank you.
So the landowner's already been making use of that site. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stavros. Now I am going to put recommendation 2, that the committee recommends to Council to approve the disposal of surplus road reserve at part of Pongakawa Valley Road, Rotorua, as shown on the attached plan to the adjacent property in exchange for land required for a proposed pumping station. It's been moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Mr. Thomas. Are there any further discussion? Well, I'm going to put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you, carried.
I'm against.
Thank
Can
you.
I have my vote recorded against, please, in the minutes?
Certainly, thank you. Now, I'll take a resolution to go into public, excluded. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Can I have a mover and a seconder? Sorry, I've got a mover and a seconder that our committee move into public excluded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, thank you. We'll take a 10-minute recess and have a break. Thank you.